So I need to make the satin and only the satin fabric a little bit stronger because it's a very flimsy, very lightweight fabric. And I sell it because people ask for it. I really recommend using the satin if you want something with a shine that's medium weight. But satin is a very lightweight fabric. So to make it medium weight, we have to attach it to another piece of fabric. And I usually use muslin. You can use some other fabrics, as I mentioned in the materials. Someone also asked me about using an iron-on stabilizer to do this. You can do that as long as it's a fabric stabilizer, not the paper kind that used with embroidery machines. That paper kind will deteriorate, but the kind that's used for in dressmaking, like in collars, lapels, an iron-on fleece will add a little bit of lift, but not too much. So I'm adding it to a piece of linen, which is muslin, old linen, not old linen, old sheet, which is basically muslin. It's a medium weight. I put, I spread out the muslin on the table, the sheet on the table, so I know how big it is. And I've ironed it first, so there won't be any wrinkles. Now I'm putting tissue paper underneath the edges, and this is because I'm going to be using um, a spray glue, a quilter's glue, and that spray goes everywhere. And I don't want the spray to go onto the fabric. Um, I want it to be only on the back of this piece of satin. So I'm putting paper around the edges. You can use copy paper. I'm using tissue paper. It's large and it's cheap. And you could also use plastic garbage bags, pretty much, but don't use newsprint because of the ink. So I'm just going around putting tissue paper underneath this. Um, I'm not going to pin it down just because the weight, the whole, I want to be able to pull the paper out afterwards and then flip the fabric over. So I'm just going around the outside edges and putting tissue underneath it. I've already used this tissue. I've actually done the front of this already. Um, but I at that one I pinned down and I didn't like um, the glue gets all over the heads of the pins, even though I pinned it from the wrong side. So this time I'm just placing the paper underneath it, and you can reuse the paper. You as long after it dries, you can, as I'm doing here, I'm pulling out the places where it stuck to itself. Um, the glue, the quilter's glue that I'm using, this Elmer's fabric glue, is make is tacky, and it will, uh, but you can reposition it while it's still wet, and it does not hold really well, but it holds long enough for what we need it for. So and so the next day I can, or the later after everything's dry, I can reuse this tissue paper. So I'm just rearranging the tissue, making it stick out quite a bit outside. You don't need much underneath the fabric. You're just protecting the areas outside the fabric from the glue. Because as I say, it's an aerosol, so it goes everywhere. And if you want to wear gloves, you can do that. You can expect to get some on your hands, but it does dry and rub off, wash off. Uh, so now I have the tissue paper down and I'm spreading it out so it's rather smooth. And I'm shaking, you can't probably see me here, but I'm shaking the can of glue um, to get it to, um, like a can of paint. You want to make sure that it's all mixed up. And now I'm spraying it, and you just spray it lightly. You don't want to spray too much in any spot because you don't want it to go through the fabric, and it will go through the fabric. So, is that an issue? It'll just make the fabric stiffer, but that's the whole point of this anyway. So I'm just putting a light misting of it around, and especially going near the edges. And then once I've sprayed it, um, I'm going to pull the paper out from underneath it. Now the paper will stick to it occasionally. It's not sticking to the fabric because it'll loose loose any threads that near around the edges will sometimes stick to that paper. Um, but it's easier to do this than the way I did it first by pinning it. It's much easier to pull these papers out. And now once they're all out, I'm going to want to flip them over. Flip the vestment piece over. And I usually want to start in the middle and push it towards the edges. The glue will grab the other fabric, and you want to run all those wrinkles out to the edge. Now there's a wrinkle there, and I'm trying to get it, see if it will come out. Um, I only ironed half the sheet, and I didn't iron the other half. Um, I used part of it already when I cut out the front. So I'm going to getting the iron and going with steam to get that wrinkle out. Because it will show up in the fabric above it. Now, as I say, there are other ways you could attach this. An iron-on stabilizer would work. You could use stitch witchery or something like that around the edges. Problem with that is you really need to make these two fabrics act like one fabric. Sticking and just sticking them around the edges is going to leave room for the fabrics to shift and separate. So um, it's better the fabric glue or an iron-on stabilizer is the better way to go instead of just putting glue around the edges and gluing the two together. All right, so I'm readjusting some of these edges where there's some wrinkles, and once everything is smoothed out, I'm going to put pins in it. I'm pinning directly into the table. I have a pad on my table. I can just push the pins down into it. Just the whole point of this is just to hold the two together so there's no movement, and then I have to let it sit there for a while until the glue dries. And then I'm going to cut it out all the way around the edge using the satin as the pattern and cut the two together and making them one piece. And what I do is I do once I cut this out, it'll be on the table. I will then just fold it over slightly and put the lining underneath it and go and line this piece. Before I do the next piece, before I glue the next piece of satin to muslin, I will line this one. Why do I do that? Because they will separate. If you move them around too much, they will separate. So I want to move them as little as possible. And I do that even if even if I don't have to use an interliner, or even if I don't have to use something like this, whenever I make a vestment, I cut out one piece on the fabric, I put the design on it, I immediately line it before I go and do the next piece, because um, it's the less you use, the better.